My name is Sister Clara. That's what they call me within the ancient frostbitten stone walls of St. Agnes Convent, a decaying fortress nestled in the shadowed hills of northern Europe, where the wind howls like a mourner who's forgotten why she weeps. My real name, Anna, was torn from me the day I took my vows, discarded like a wilted flower pressed into the pages of a forgotten book. I was 19, barely more than a girl, running from a past that clung to me like damp rot. My father drank himself into an early grave, his breath sour with whiskey and regret. My mother, cold as the winter that drove me here, vanished into her own bitterness, leaving me with nothing but a battered suitcase and a heart stitched with scars. The convent promised salvation, a clean slate, a purpose to fill the void. But let me tell you a truth no priest will whisper from the pulpit. You can't outrun your demons, not even in a house of God. What I've seen, what I've done behind these sacred walls, will haunt you. This is my confession, and every word will pull you deeper into a darkness you never knew existed. Don't look away. You won't be able to. I arrived at St. Agnes in the autumn of 2005, when the leaves burned red and the air carried the sharp bite of coming winter. The convent was a relic, its foundations laid in the 14th century, its stones polished smooth by centuries of silent footsteps. The iron gates creaked as they closed behind me, sealing me into a world of gray walls and endless prayers. Mother Superior, Sister Agnes, greeted me with eyes like chips of glacier, cold and unyielding. "God has chosen you, Clara," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "You belong to him now." Those words felt like a lifeline at first, a promise of peace after years of chaos. But they weren't a promise. They were a chain, forged to bind me to this place. The vows I took were simple: poverty, chastity, obedience. They sounded noble, holy, like a path to redemption. But nobody tells you what vows really do. They don't erase your desires. They bury them deep, where they fester, rot, and claw their way back to the surface, hungrier than before. By the end of my first month, I knew St. Agnes wasn't a sanctuary. It was a prison, and the nuns around me weren't saints. They were women, broken, hiding, carrying secrets heavier than the crosses around their necks. Some were worse. Some were dangerous, their eyes glinting with a malice that made my skin prickle. Life in the convent was a relentless cycle, designed to grind you into submission. We rose before dawn for matins, our breath clouding in the frigid chapel as we chanted Latin psalms. We worked in the gardens, our hands raw from pulling weeds or harvesting potatoes under a sky that never seemed to warm. Meals were silent, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound in the refectory. Then more prayers, vespers, compline, until we collapsed into our cells, narrow rooms with a cot, a crucifix, and a single candle. The walls were thick, soaked in centuries of secrets, and they seemed to hum with something alive, something wrong. At night, when the candles were snuffed out and the hymns faded, the silence broke. Whispers drifted through the halls, sharp and desperate, sometimes cruel. I thought I was imagining them at first, my mind frayed from exhaustion and isolation. But they grew louder, more distinct, weaving through the darkness like threads of a spider's web. They weren't prayers. They were something else, something that made my heart pound and my palms sweat. The walls of St. Agnes weren't just old. They were watching. One night I saw her, Sister Ruth. She was older, maybe 40, with a face like cracked porcelain, pale and fragile but hiding something sharp beneath. She'd been at St. Agnes for decades, her eyes not holy but haunted, glinting with a hunger I couldn't name. I caught her slipping out of her cell, her black habit swaying like a ghost in the moonlight that spilled through the cloister's arched windows. I should have stayed in bed, should have pulled the rough wool blanket over my head and prayed for sleep. but curiosity has always been my sin, a flame that burns brighter than my faith. I followed her, my bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, my heart hammering so loud I was sure she'd hear it. She moved with purpose, gliding through the shadows to the chapel, a cavernous room where the air smelled of wax and incense. But she didn't kneel to pray. She knelt before the altar in defiance, her head bowed not in reverence but in something darker. A knife glinted in her hand, its blade catching the flicker of the vigil candles. She was muttering words, low and guttural, that weren't Latin, weren't holy. They were wrong, like a song played backward. She wasn't praying, she was cursing. I pressed myself against the pews, hidden in the shadows, my breath shallow. Ruth carved a symbol into the wooden altar, a jagged, twisting mark that seemed to pulse with its own life. It wasn't Christian, not a cross or a dove, but something ancient, something that made my stomach churn. The air grew heavy, oppressive, like the chapel was holding its breath. I wanted to run, to scream, but my feet were rooted to the floor, my body betraying me. The symbol stared back at me, its lines writhing in the candlelight. And for a moment, I swore I heard a voice, not Ruth's, but something deeper, older, whispering my name. The next morning, the altar was pristine, the wood smooth and unmarked, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen, and Ruth knew I'd seen it. She cornered me in the garden the next day, where I was pulling carrots from the frost-hardened earth. Her shadow fell over me, long and cold, and when I looked up, her eyes burned with something more than anger, something ancient, something that made my skin crawl. "You saw nothing, Clara," she hissed, her fingers digging into my arm, hard enough to bruise. "Speak, and you'll regret it." Her voice was a blade, sharp and precise, and I felt the weight of her threat settle into my bones. I should have kept my mouth shut, should have buried what I'd seen like the convent buried its secrets. But fear made me reckless, and I went to Mother Superior, thinking she'd protect me, that she'd restore order in this holy place. I was wrong. She listened, her face a mask of calm, her hands folded neatly on her desk. Then she stood, her rosary beads clicking like a countdown, and sentenced me to 3 days in the penance room, a windowless cell in the convent's underbelly, with nothing but a Bible, a bucket, and the suffocating dark. No food, no light, just the weight of my own thoughts, and the whispers that followed me even there. That's when I understood. St. Agnes wasn't protecting us from sin. It was hiding it. Ruth wasn't acting alone. There was a group of them, nuns who met in secret, who performed rituals that would make your blood freeze. And Mother Superior? She wasn't just aware. She was their leader, the spider at the center of the web. The penance room broke something in me. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It was alive, pressing against me, whispering things I couldn't understand but felt in my marrow. When they let me out, I was gaunt, my voice hoarse from praying, my mind frayed. The other nuns looked at me differently, their glances sharp with pity or suspicion. But there was one who didn't look away. Sister Mary, my only friend in this gray purgatory. She was my age, with a laugh that felt like sunlight breaking through the convent's gloom. We'd steal moments to talk, whispering in the laundry room as we scrubbed linens, sharing fragments of the lives we'd left behind. She was devout, gentle, the kind of soul you'd think God handpicked for his service. She'd tell me about her childhood in a small village, her dreams of being a teacher before her family sent her here to atone for some vague sin she never explained. Her presence was the only warmth in this place, a tether to the girl I used to be. But one morning, she was gone. Mother Superior announced it at breakfast, her voice flat as the stone floor. "Sister Mary has broken her vows and fled in the night," she said, her eyes scanning the refectory as if daring us to question her. "She has chosen the world over God." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't believe them. Mary wasn't like that. She'd never leave without a word, not to me. I waited for a letter, a message, anything to prove she was safe. Nothing came. The other nuns whispered, their voices low and nervous, but none dared speak openly. I couldn't let it go. Mary was my anchor, and without her, I felt myself unraveling. So I did something forbidden. I snuck into the archives, a locked room in the convent's basement where records were kept, their pages yellowed with age. The air was thick with dust, the shelves lined with ledgers that chronicled centuries of St. Agnes's history. I searched for hours, my hands trembling, my candle flickering in the damp air. I found nothing about Mary. No letter, no transfer, no proof she'd left. But there was something else. Hidden in a locked drawer I pried open with a hairpin. A ledger, not like the others, its pages filled with names, dates, and sums of money. Payments to whom? For what? And there, in black ink, was Mary's name, marked with a single word: resolved. My heart stopped. Resolved. Was she dead? Banished? Something worse? The word was cold, final, like a tombstone carved in ink. I couldn't sleep after that. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of a shadow, felt like a threat. The whispers grew louder, not just at night, but in the daylight, weaving through the hymns, curling around my thoughts like smoke. I wasn't alone in my cell anymore. Something was watching me, something that knew my fears, my doubts, my sins. I tried to hold on to my prayers, but they felt hollow, like shouting into a void that swallowed every word. I started seeing things, shadows that moved when they shouldn't, faces in the corners of my vision, hands reaching from the walls. My faith, once a shield, was crumbling, and in its place was a gnawing dread that St. Agnes wasn't what it seemed. It wasn't a house of God. It was something else, something older, something that fed on the souls it claimed to save. Then there was Father Elias, the young priest who came to hear our confessions once a month. He was different from the others, kind, with a voice that soothed like a lullaby, and eyes that saw me, not just Sister Clara, but Anna, the woman I'd buried beneath my habit. He was only a few years older than me, his face unlined by the weight of decades in the church. During confession, he'd listen, not with judgment, but with understanding, his questions gentle, his silences warm. It started small, a touch on the hand as I left the confessional, a glance that lingered too long. I knew it was wrong, knew my vows of chastity were sacred, but this place starved you of warmth, of humanity. It ground you down until you were nothing but duty and despair. One night, after confession, he stayed. The chapel was empty. The candles burned low, casting long shadows across the pews. He spoke of his own doubts, his loneliness, the weight of his collar that felt more like a noose some days. I should have sent him away. I should have remembered who I was supposed to be. But in the darkness of the confessional, with the world shut out, we crossed a line. His hand brushed my cheek and I didn't pull away. His lips found mine, and for a moment, I wasn't Sister Clara, trapped in a convent of secrets. I was Anna, alive, wanted, human. It wasn't love. It was desperation, a rebellion against the chains of St. Agnes. But it was enough to damn me. Someone saw us. I don't know who. Maybe Ruth. Maybe another nun whose loyalty lay with Mother Superior. The next morning, I was dragged from my cell, my habit torn at the shoulder from the force of their grip. Mother Superior stood in her office, her face a mask of fury, her rosary beads clicking like a judge's gavel. "You've betrayed God, Clara," she said, her voice cutting like a blade. "You've defiled his house." Father Elias was sent away, his reputation untouched, as men's often are in this world. But me? I was branded a harlot, a stain on the convent's purity. They didn't expel me. That would have been mercy. Instead, they sent me to the cellar, a damp, freezing hole beneath the convent where the air smelled of mold and decay. For weeks I was locked there, fed scraps of bread and water, forced to recite prayers until my throat was raw and my voice broke. The walls were slick with moisture, the darkness so thick it felt like it was pressing against my chest. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the voices, whispers, laughter, cries that weren't human, echoing in the dark. They called my name, mocked my prayers, told me I'd never leave. I wasn't alone down there. Something moved in the shadows, something that brushed against my skin when I closed my eyes. I saw things, faces, pale and twisted, eyes that glowed like embers. I told myself it was madness, that the isolation was breaking me. But deep down, I knew it was real. Something lived in the cellar, something St. Agnes had fed for centuries. When they finally let me out, I wasn't the same. My hands shook, my eyes darted to every shadow, every corner. The other nuns avoided me, their whispers trailing me like ghosts. Ruth was always there, watching, her cracked porcelain face split by a knowing smile. She knew what I'd seen, what I'd done, and she used it. One night she came to my cell, her voice low and commanding. "You're one of us now, Clara," she said. "You've sinned. You've seen. There's no going back." I wanted to refuse, to cling to the scraps of my faith, but she didn't give me a choice. She led me to the crypt, a forbidden maze of tunnels and chambers beneath the convent, sealed off since the Middle Ages. The air was thick with the smell of earth and something sharper, like blood. At midnight, under a high moon that cast no light into the depths, they gathered. Ruth, Mother Superior, and a handful of others, their faces lit by flickering torches. Their habits were gone, replaced by plain robes stained with red. I was forced to watch, then to participate. They didn't pray to God. They prayed to something older, something cruel. The symbols they carved into the stone walls were the same as the one Ruth had etched into the altar, jagged, twisting, alive. The chants were guttural, in a language I didn't know but felt in my bones, like a warning from my soul. They spilled blood, not theirs, but something else's, something that stained the floor and made the air hum with wrongness. They promised power, protection, eternal life. But at what cost? I saw visions in the smoke. Fire, eyes that weren't human, hands reaching from the darkness, and Mary's face, screaming, her eyes pleading, her mouth forming my name. I realized then, St. Agnes wasn't a convent. It was a tomb, a front for something far darker. For centuries, they'd been guarding something, feeding it with their rituals, their secrets, their sacrifices. And Mary? She wasn't gone. She was taken. Her name in the ledger wasn't a mistake. It was a record of their offering. I tried to resist, to hold on to what little faith I had left, but the convent broke me. The whispers followed me everywhere, seeping into my dreams, my prayers, my every thought. I saw Mary in every shadow, her face pale and twisted, her hands reaching for me. I saw other faces too, women I didn't know, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. The crypt wasn't just a place of rituals. It was a graveyard, a prison for the souls they'd given to whatever they served. I stopped praying. The words felt like ash in my mouth, meaningless against the weight of what I'd seen. I was trapped, a prisoner of stone and sin, my vows a mockery of the life I'd been promised. The other nuns knew, too. Some were part of it, their eyes gleaming with the same hunger as Ruth's. Others were like me, broken and silent, too afraid to speak. We lived in a delicate balance, pretending to be holy while the darkness festered beneath our feet. I couldn't stay. I couldn't become like them. One night, when the moon was hidden behind clouds and the convent slept, I stole a key from Ruth's cell. My hands shook as I crept through the halls, avoiding the creaking boards, the watchful eyes of the statues that lined the cloister. The saints seemed to judge me, their stone faces accusing, but I didn't care. I reached the side gate, a rusted relic hidden behind the garden, and slipped into the forest. The air was cold, biting my skin through my thin habit, but it felt like freedom. I ran, my breath ragged, my feet tearing on roots and stones. I didn't look back, not even when I heard the whispers following me, carried on the wind. I thought I was free. I thought I'd escaped. But as I sit here telling you this, I feel them, the shadows, the voices, the weight of St. Agnes. They followed me. They're in my dreams, my reflection, the corners of every room. I see Mary's face, her screams louder now, her hands clawing at me. I see Ruth's smile, Mother Superior's eyes, the symbol that pulses like a heartbeat in my mind. I don't know if I'm a nun or a sinner anymore. Maybe I'm both. Maybe I'm neither. But I know this. St. Agnes still stands, its gates locked, its secrets buried beneath prayers and hymns. The nuns are still there, performing their rituals, feeding whatever lives in the crypt. And they're not alone. There are others, convents, churches, places that wear the mask of holiness while serving something else. I'm telling you this because someone needs to know. Someone needs to stop them. But be warned. The truth comes with a price. Once you know, you can't unknow. You're part of my confession now. Part of the web. What will you do with it? Will you expose the darkness? Will you dig deeper, risk everything to find the truth? Or will you turn away, like everyone else, and pretend this is just a story? The choice is yours, but St. Agnes doesn't forget, and it never lets go.